If you perhaps are joining us only now, we find ourselves this morning in Psalm 121, a very familiar psalm. In fact, if you are as old as I am or older than I am, you probably learned this even at school, at primary school, if not in your home. A very familiar psalm, Psalm 121. I asked you to notice the words in that familiar hymn, Amazing Grace. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. If there are lines of a hymn that captures the meaning of a psalm, it would be those lines that relate to Psalm 121. You may know of Dr. David Livingstone, the well-known explorer and physician and missionary who left for Africa as a young man in the early 1840s. And Livingstone understood that this is the meaning of Psalm 121, so that before he left Blantyre in Scotland for Africa, he prayed with his father and his sister, and he prayed this psalm because he understood that as he was seeking to obey God and serve God and honor God with his life, that he would need God's protection. This is what this psalm is all about. I reminded you maybe 2 weeks ago now that this psalm is in a context of Psalms 120 through 134, that are known as the Psalms of Ascent, because 3 times a year at least, Jewish worshippers would go to Jerusalem uh, during the feast of Passover and Pentecost and booths or tabernacles, where they would corporately worship the Lord. I want you to keep that corporate worship component of the context of this psalm in mind. I'm going to try and reference it every now and then, because as a church, as we contemplate the possibility of meeting live again, we need to hear the psalm, and we need to be encouraged by its truths. And as I've been alluding to a number of times now, the main theme of this psalm in this context of corporate worship is God's protection. In fact, verses 1 and 2, as I'll show you in a moment, lay the foundation for the psalm. But then verses 3 through 8, in those 6 verses, 6 times this theme of God's protection comes forth. So 6 times in 6 verses. Let's set the psalm in our minds by reading it together, because it's a short psalm. We can afford to do that today. We don't always have time to do that. But let me do that, and then we'll come back and look at it more carefully. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains or the hills. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. He will keep your soul. The Lord will guard your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forever. If you want a little roadmap to follow the psalm, if you want an outline to help you understand the psalm and follow the augmentation and the progression of the psalm, you can think of it this way. In the psalm, there are 4 provisions of a powerful and present protector during a time of peril. And the first of these come forth in verses 1 and 2, and it is this: the supply of a powerful protector. So there are four provisions of a powerful and present protector during a time of peril. And by peril, I mean a serious and immediate danger. I mean a risk, a threat, an insecurity. Look at verse 1 again. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains or to the hills. And you might think to yourself, what is the psalmist doing here? Why is he saying this? Well, I suggested to you before, 2 weeks ago, that as pilgrims, as worshippers made their way to Jerusalem, they would have to climb about 2,700 feet gradually, a little over 800 meters, 820 meters or so. And so this journey, depending on where you came from, would take you at least a day or two, but sometimes a few days if you lived further away from Jerusalem. And so as you approach Jerusalem, by now you would be tired somewhat from the journey. But remember, you are anticipating worship. But here's something that you may not realize. What the psalmist would also anticipate is the prospect and the reality of danger, a threat. How so? Well, in those days, they didn't have many roads, and they certainly didn't have tar roads like you and I have. Basically, they had well-beaten, well-trodden paths. And as you think about Jerusalem and going up to Jerusalem, these well-beaten, traveled paths, some would extend through valleys and along ravines, but of course, as you ascend the hills, some would be along the hills or these mountains, if you like. So there were very few options open to you as you traveled. Well, there were bad guys in those days. There were robbers, there were thieves in those days, and they would hide along these paths, and they would rob and steal and even hurt travelers. Now think about this. Because of this threat and because of the occasion of fellowship, travelers often traveled in caravans of people. They traveled in convoy. They would travel in a group. And we know that there is strength in numbers, but even so, the psalmist is not depending on his company. He knows that these are gangs with multiple members, because they know that people travel in caravans and in convoy, and so they were large gangs of robbers. And so he's anticipating worship, but he's also thinking to himself, am I going to get there? Now, how can you be so sure that this is at the forefront of the psalmist's mind? Yes, he anticipates worship, but he's wondering if he's going to get to worship. How can you be so sure? Well, for a number of reasons. The word help. I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from whence shall come my help. And then this same word, help, in verse 2, is used about 80 times in the Old Testament, generally for military assistance when you're attacked by enemies. So that's one clue. Also, if you drop down for a moment to verse 6, the sun will not smite me. That word for smite, there's the word for strike or attack, and that was another common word in military context. And so as you study the customs of the day and the history of this time, you know that this was a very dangerous reality. And as you scan Old Testament scholars and their works, like I have done this past week, for example, I looked at the work of Dr. Walter C. Kaiser, who wrote a whole commentary just on the Psalms of Ascent that he entitled "The Journey Isn't Over." And when it came to Psalm 121, this beloved and well-respected Old Testament scholar gave this title to Psalm 121: When your life is threatened. When your life is threatened. See, Walter Kaiser understands that this is the immediate context of this psalm. And perhaps I'll borrow the title of his chapter when we put the sermon on our website: When Your Life is Threatened. Now that's verse 1. Let's look for a moment now at verse 2. Because in verse 2, we're going to learn about the supply, as I suggested to you, of a powerful protector. Look at verse 2. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Now, what you need to know, beloved, is the psalmist is not trying to make a case for the Creator. The psalmist in his day was not embroiled in the creation versus evolution debate as we find ourselves in our day. So you need to ask yourself, why does the psalmist choose to zoom in and to zero in on God as the creator, the maker of heaven and earth? Because the psalmist is emphasizing God's sovereignty in creation. He's trying to teach you and I again and remind us that God rules over all his creation. God is and has ultimate power over all his creation, both in heaven and earth. He not only has ultimate power in heaven and earth, but he has unlimited power. So what the psalmist is attempting to communicate and to express here is that he is not looking to anyone or anything in all of creation for his help, but to the Creator alone. The psalmist is not looking to a scientist and is not looking to a vaccine. The psalmist is not looking to a general and is not looking to a weapon. The psalmist is not looking to a president and is not looking to a strong economy. No, he is looking to the one who's able to create something out of nothing. The one who's able to make a way where there seems to be no way. The one for whom nothing is too difficult or impossible. The point that the psalmist is trying to make is that this God, the maker, the creator of heaven and earth, has full control over all things, animate as well as inanimate, all creation, both in heaven and on earth, both violent criminals and virulent viruses. He has ultimate and unlimited control over all things. Now, as I suggested to you before, for the psalmist, dangers on his way to worship included wild animals, and it included just physical challenges. Remember, this is an ascent, and so there would be loose ground and loose rocks, and you could easily sprain your ankle and fall. There were these physical challenges but also robbers and thieves, violent gangs, criminals. Well, you and I, especially those of us who live in Johannesburg, know something of violence. But of course, during this time, what constitutes a danger for you and I as we think about not only life but corporate worship in particular is, of course, the COVID-19 virus. Now, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a medical researcher, but I want to return briefly to this subject this morning, and I hope to give you, if you like, a threat perspective again. And what I want to show you, or try to show you, is that this is a threat, but there are also other threats. To begin with, listen to a stat from Stats SA concerning the population of South Africa. I accessed this past Friday. The population of South Africa is around 59,620,000 mid 2020. And by Friday, I know the number's gone up by now, but I have to submit my PowerPoint to the men by Friday to give them time to make it pretty and less bland, like I submitted to them, so that they can also enjoy something of the weekend and time with their family. So Friday, when I looked, the deaths relating to the COVID virus was 7,812 deaths. Now, when you look at the number of deaths as it relates to our present population size, it means that 0.01% of our population have died due to COVID-related conditions. But it also means that 99.9% have been preserved. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me here. I'm not saying that 0.01% means nothing. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not in any way wanting to make light of the very real pain of those who have lost loved ones. I've had family members who have been infected with this virus. This hits a little closer to home even. I just heard recently that 2 streets removed from my mom, where she lives in Oudtshoorn, one of my former primary school teachers passed away due to COVID-related complications. There have been people in our church who have been infected, thankfully have come through it, but we've also lost at least one person in our congregation to COVID-related complications. And so I don't want to dismiss this virus. I've told you before, we need to respect it. It is dangerous. It is deadly. It is real. It is very contagious. But what I hope to provide you in the next few minutes is just something of a threat perspective. In some ways, 99.99% is somewhat encouraging, is it not? Also, if you think about early on, a few months ago, when some computer models were being generated, Dr. Neil Ferguson, for example, of the Imperial College of London, initially for the UK predicted 510,000 deaths and 2.2 million deaths for the US. Now, admittedly, Dr. Ferguson has acknowledged that his numbers were off and that he got it wrong, and credit to him for that. But initial estimates were 510,000, for example, in the UK, and today there's about 46,000 deaths in the UK. Well, that's a big difference, isn't it? 510 to 46,000. And in the US, 2.2 million is now about 156,000. Now, again, for very real people who have lost loved ones, they don't care about those numbers. They're mourning as I speak. We want to be sensitive to that. Again, I say I'm trying to just give you something of a threat perspective. The numbers are not as great, generally speaking, as was predicted. But beyond that, let me give you some other stats, and this is again from Stats SA. Listen, I quote directly from a document, and unfortunately, this is from 2017. This is the latest stats that I could get a hold of from Stats SA. So it is a few years old, but at least it gives us something of a reference point. But listen, the results showed that the total number of deaths registered at the Department of Home Affairs and processed by Stats SA in 2017 were 446,554. Incidentally, the number of deaths predicted for 2020 is 534,000. How do you get to that? Well, for some years now, the mortality rate in South Africa is about 9 people for every 1,000 people. And so when you take our present population size and you apply the 9 out of 1,000 deaths, you come to about 534,000. But here's what I want you to get, because here's one threat amongst others. The age groups 60 to 64, so remember this is back in 2017, the age group 60 to 64 and 65 to 69 had the highest proportion of deaths in 27, both those age groups at 8.1%. So if you're a South African, the threat of older age, especially 60 and following, is a very real threat to you, even today and even before COVID-19. This will continue to be a threat for you. It was a threat in the past. It will be a threat. If you over 60, your age together with a compounding of other underlying medical conditions will place you at a higher risk. So you are at a higher risk. Age and compounded medical conditions, comorbidities will place you at a higher risk, and they are very real threats to you. Now, not only that, in this presentation, the 2017 report, which I'm going to reference again now, and what I'm going to reference now is Appendix M. You can just Google this. I can email you this document, several hundred pages. But Appendix M has the mortality and causes of death in South Africa, 2017. But what I'm going to highlight now is the 10 leading underlying natural causes of death. Listen, number 1, TB, tuberculosis. In 2017, there were 28,768 deaths from TB. So TB is a threat. Not only that, it was a greater threat for men. So if you're 60 years old and older, that is a real threat to your life at any time. If you're a male in this country, by the way, these 10 underlying causes, they present them by age and sex and so forth, but these are for all ages. So this is the summary that I'm presenting to you. But I'm just telling you, if you're a male, there's a threat of TB. That's the number one natural cause in 2017. Then, secondly, or thirdly, maybe I should say, diabetes is number two. But women were at higher risk. There were more women who died from diabetes as we know it in 2017, and that figure came in at 25,336. So if you're 60 years and older, that's a threat. If you're a male, TB is a threat for females too, but a little higher threat for men. If you're a female, diabetes is a greater threat for you. Coming in at number 3 in the top 10 is cerebrovascular diseases, and by that they mean things like strokes and aneurysms. 22,259. That's number 3. Then dropping down to number 5 is HIV, which I put in there because that's a form of virus, right? The human immunodeficiency virus. Notice that 21,439. That came in at number 5. Then number 7, influenza and pneumonia. And I've got a little asterisk next to influenza because, we speak, for example, about stomach flu, but that's not really what we're talking about here. This influenza here is a viral infection that attacks your respiratory system. And of course, it's a family member of the COVID virus, and so that's why I put that in here. Now you'll notice that they combine influenza with pneumonia at 18,837. But if you go to our local CDC website, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website, that and the influenza program was started by them in 2007. If you go to their website, you will learn that annually there's about 10,000 people that die from influenza. So according to those figures, would be about 8,000 from pneumonia, but about 10,000 annually on average die from the common flu as we know it, and there are 40,000 hospitalizations for influenza every year. And so I think that's a significant one, only because of its viral connection. And then still in terms of respiratory diseases, number 8 would be chronic lower respiratory diseases. That comes in at 13,169. And then number 10, they just have other viral diseases. Notice 12,622. And so, beloved, again, I'm not saying dismiss COVID-19 virus. I'm not saying put the blinders on. I'm not saying bury your head in the sand. I'm not denying this. I'm not in denial. I'm just saying, through many dangers, toils, and snares, you have already been brought. This grace has brought you safe thus far, and grace will lead you on. Now, just out of interest, I added, now you'll notice in my little bibliographic detail, I have Appendix M. This is the top 10. But in Appendix K, if you were to look at that document, out of interest, I included a SALT. In 2017, 7,688 people were beaten to death. You can be beaten to death in this country. That's a very real threat. And then here's another interesting one, transport accidents. This is in Appendix K, and they have 5,890. Now, when I saw that, 5,890, I thought, that can't be right, because I know that there actually, on average, is about 1,000 road fatalities on our roads, on average. And so I dug a little deeper into this document, this Stats Essay document presentation of 2017, and listen to what they say concerning transport accidents. They say, quote, the unexpected lower number of deaths due to transport accidents is the result of causes classified as other external causes of accidental injury or event of undetermined intent. The reason why this number is relatively low at 5,890 is because they don't group and lump all road fatalities in the same category. And so when you do that, you learn, for example, that in this year, when you study the total number of fatalities on our roads, in 2017, it came to 14,050. See, more than 1,000 a month. By the way, in 2016, it was 14,071. There was a slight drop in 2018, 12,921. But you can see more than 1,000 a month on average. You say, wait a minute, I thought that only happens in December when so many deaths take place on our roads, when we learn that more than 1,000 people were killed on our roads. No, it happens every month. So why are you so aware of it come December time when people are going on holiday? Because during that time, the media alerts you to it. Just like the media is holding COVID-19 as the only threat to you right now, and you're very familiar with the numbers because they are holding it before you. Beloved, there are other threats. In fact, if you read toward the end of last week, I think it was around Friday, the Minister of Police, Mr. Tait, released the crime statistics for this past year. And perhaps you saw that this past year there were 21,325 murders this past year. 21,325, up 1.4% from the previous year. That's about 58 murders a day. Now, you and I may be ignorant or we may be desensitized, but the reason we're not aware of that so much is because the media isn't daily, like they're doing with COVID now, saying at the top of the hour, 58 more people have died today. The next day, 58 more people have been murdered today. 58 more people have been murdered today. 58 more people have been murdered today. This past month, over 1,000 people died on our roads. This past month, over 1,000. No. But these are real threats. Now, coming back to that top 10 slide, just one more time. In that list there, the top 10, of course, I put the COVID deaths as of this Friday at 7,812. Now, beloved, I'm not a prophet, nor the son of a prophet, as the saying goes. And I don't know where the COVID deaths will end. I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that the numbers will, of course, go up. And perhaps they are underreported. Even the numbers that we have right now. But I hope that you can see that at least as of today, the 2nd of August 2020, in terms of historical numbers, you are, as a South African, at a greater risk of TB, dying from TB, or diabetes, or a stroke, or an aneurysm, or HIV, or even being murdered. So again, I don't dismiss the COVID threat, but I wanted to provide you with a kind of threat perspective. And again, I say, through many dangers, toils, and snares, We have already come. This grace has brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. We're still responsible. We're not negligent. Uh, we're not dismissive of the threats. But beloved, in this country, you are surrounded by threats daily, including many, many forms of viral threats. So you and I need to look to this one, this powerful protector, the maker of heaven and earth, who has all the resources in heaven and earth at his disposal to protect you and I. So we've seen, number one, the supply of a powerful protector, and really verses 1 and 2 form the foundation that verses 3 through 8 are built upon. So secondly then, following on this first point, there's the support of a present protector. He is powerful, but the amazing thing is he's present to help. Now, I've been saying to you that the theme, the overarching theme of this psalm is God's protection. The same word is translated different ways, and so you can miss this, but it's the same word that appears 6 times in 6 verses. In my translation, it's the word keeps in verses 3 and 4, keeper, verse 5, keep, verse 7, protect, verse 8, and then God, verse 7, sorry, protect, verse 7, and then God, verse 8. And there's really a progression, a natural progression in the psalm. If you think about it, you can be strong from verses 1 and 2, having received strength and aid from the maker of heaven and earth, but that doesn't mean that you can't stumble, that you can't trip because of the loose sand or the loose rocks, or that you pushed violently by one of these violent gang members. Remember in Psalm 18, for example, the psalmist says, "You pushed me violently so that I was falling, but God helped me." So you can be strong, but you can be caught off guard, or you can slip. And so you don't only need strength, you need support. You need someone to hold you up. Now notice I emphasize the support of a present creator, because look at the end of verse 3, he who keeps you will not slumber. And this is sort of the word for just nodding off, dozing off. But then look at verse 4, behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber, that word for just nodding off, but then for sleep, for a deep sleep. And so God is present. He does not sleep, he does not slumber. You recall in 1 Kings 18, when Elisha challenged the prophets of Baal. Remember, he said, let's present a sacrifice on the altar, and the God who answers with fire is the true and living God. And remember, at one time, he was mocking and taunting these false prophets, and he said to them, perhaps your God went to relieve himself, perhaps he went to use the restroom. And then he also says to them, perhaps he went to sleep. Well, the maker of heaven and earth does not sleep. God never falls asleep at the wheel. God never nods off. I remember when I was at seminary, studying for the ministry, I served as a security officer at what is now the Master's University, and I did that to help pay for my tuition. And I worked the so-called graveyard shift, which is 10 p.m. at night to 6 a.m. in the morning. 10 p.m. at night to 6 a.m. in the morning. And then my classes started at 7:30 a.m., an hour and a half later. And if you know anything of the traffic of LA, at that time of the morning, it's peak hour traffic. And And the school that I was attending was, depending on traffic, 45 minutes to an hour away or so drive from where I worked. And so I basically had to get changed immediately, get into the car, and then go to school so that I could be there on time at 7:30. But as you can imagine, I was a zombie. I was nodding off on the roads. I would straddle the lines, and I would hallucinate. I would see trucks coming. I mean, it was scary, but God preserved me for the 4 years that I was there. And during the shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., how it worked is you would patrol for 1 hour, and then you'd be in the booth for 1 hour. And there was some administrative detail you had to record when you came into the booth, but that didn't take too long. And then for the rest of the time, you could do schoolwork like I did. But as you can imagine, there were many a night. Even though I tried to do schoolwork, I was just tired. I would read the same paragraph 10 times, and then I realized this is just a waste of time, and I would occasionally find myself nodding off. I don't say that with pride. I'm just telling you that's the reality. Because remember, in addition to finishing at 6, starting class at 7:30, when you came from class, you had assignments and homework, and so you ended up sleeping like 4 hours a day, if that. Well, God is not like that. He is there to catch you when you fall. He never slumbers. He never sleeps. He's like a parent. If you're a parent, you know that when your children were younger, and you would walk with them in town, you would hold their hand to protect them, and when they came to the pavement or to the curb, uh, oftentimes if they were young, really young, they could trip. But because you were holding your hand, you caught them, you held them up. It's like training wheels on a bicycle. When you first start to ride, it holds you up, it supports you, it helps you maintain balance so that you don't fall. And the kind of support that God provides is like divine training wheels. And now notice verse 4, behold, this is indeed. The psalmist wants you to get this, that God doesn't sleep. He's present with you. He's never indifferent nor unavailable. He is very willing to help you, support you. It's said of Alexander the Great that when people asked him how he could sleep so soundly when there was danger, imminent danger all around him, he would say that Parmenio, his faithful God, was watching. Well, beloved, you and I have a divine Parmenio. We have a all-powerful Parmenio who watches over us. So listen to Psalm 37, verse 23, a well-known psalm. The steps of a man are established by the Lord. When he falls, he will not be hurled headlong. You will not fall flat on your face because the Lord is the one who holds his hand. How comforting is that? So, beloved, here's a suggested prayer for you during this threatening time, this dangerous time. And it's a prayer that I borrow from Psalm 119. Listen to how the psalmist prays in verse 133. This is one of the verses that appeared on your screen prior to the service. Establish my footsteps in your word, and do not let any iniquity have dominion over me. Beloved, you can pray then, but you know what? Apart from God's word, which obviously is a a resource from Psalm 119, verse 133. You know what is another resource, another means that the Lord provides to hold you up? Fellow pilgrims, fellow worshippers. How can you be so sure? Well, you can be so sure from the structure of this psalm. If you notice in verse 1, the psalmist is using personal pronouns for himself. I will lift up. From whence shall my help come? My help. Do you see that? But there's a change of pronouns in verses 3 through 8. Notice, he will not allow your foot to slip. He who keeps you will not slumber. What's happening here? There are psalms like Psalm 42, why so downcast, O my soul, where the psalmist speaks to his soul, and like Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul. There are psalms when the psalmist is speaking to himself, but here that's not happening. Here there's a fellow worshiper in this caravan, in this convoy of people traveling with this psalmist, who is now speaking to this psalmist, and he's speaking truth into this psalmist's life. And so again, beloved, you can see how that we need one another. We need the church family. We need fellow worshippers to support us and to speak truth into our lives. Listen to Psalm 122. Remember, this is still in this context of Psalms of Ascent. I'm gonna read to you verse 4, Psalm 122, verse 4. The tribes go up to Jerusalem, as we've been saying, even the tribes of the Lord. Now notice, an ordinance for Israel, meaning an authoritative order. And beloved, I suggest to you that it was an ordinance for Israel, and it's an ordinance for you and I today. But notice how this verse ends. To give thanks to the name of the Lord. What? Wait a minute. Psalmist of Psalm 122, are you telling me I can't give thanks to the Lord at home in my personal capacity? Are you telling me that I can't do this just privately in my village as I ride on my donkey? Yes, you can. But God also places a high premium on corporate worship. And so he not only asks you to do this personally and individually and privately, but he commands us to also do this corporately. Beloved, as you think about the risk that's involved in coming together again, I think about myself and how I was willing to risk the threat of this virus by going to my father's funeral to honor my father. And during this time, this time of the coronavirus, I officiated and presided over several funeral services. And not all of them were COVID-related deaths, but nevertheless, several funerals during this time. And I saw many people, family members, who were willing to risk coming to the service in the midst of this threat to honor a loved one. Well, ought you and I not be willing to risk to meet again, to worship the God whom we love? Surely we ought to. Surely we ought to. Well, I'm going to go a bit quicker through the next two final points in case you're panicking a little bit. We have seen the supply of a powerful protector. We then saw the support of a present protector. Here's a third now, the shade of a present. The remaining 3 points after point number 1 will all have the word present, because this is the emphasis of verses 3 through 8. He's not only powerful in verses 1 through 2, but he's present to help. And again, if you think about it, there's a natural progression in the psalm. Again, you can be strong, but you can still stumble. But then you can be strong and stumble, but not only stumble, but your strength can be sapped by the sun, by the heat of Palestine. As you know, this part of the world gets really, really hot. You can wilt. And so notice verse 5, the Lord is your keeper, the Lord is your shade. Notice your shade over your right hand. Now, for him to be your shade over your right hand means he has to be there. And right hand here is a metaphor for whatever you put your hand to. And remember, the context here again is corporate worship. And so, as you know, this is a psalm, and it pictures historical reality. It gets very hot here, but this is also poetry, right? The genre of the psalms is also poetry, and so it not only pictures the actual heat of the day, but it also pictures draining and sapping effects of trials by day and the long dark nights of the soul as a result of your trials. Listen to Psalm 16 and verse 8. Much like the pilgrims here in the Ascent Psalms, whose focus is Godward, whose focus is upward, whose focus is worship and obedience, the psalmist in Psalm 16 verse 8 says, I have set the Lord. Notice the Lord. Not my health, not my security, not my economic status. I have set the Lord continually before me, and because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. And that word for shaken there is the very same word for slip in Psalm 121. And then I've said to you that the word smite in verse 6 is the word to attack or to strike, and it was a common word in military contexts. And as I've said to you as well already, that a journey to Jerusalem, depending on where you came from, took at least 1 or 2 days, but often more than 2 days, so that you would be on the road at night. And you would still face the threats of robbers and thieves and wild animals. But the Lord is your shade, literally over your right hand. He provides relief. He provides relief in the midst of the distress of the trials. Finally, one more for this morning. The salvation of a present creator. Not only the supply of a powerful protector, not only the support of a present protector and the shade of a present protector, but finally the salvation of a present protector. The Lord, in verses 7 and 8, in both these verses, is placed, like our English translation suggests, right at the front for emphasis. Because he's the one doing this. I said to you that the word for guard or protect or keep occurs 6 times in verses 3 through 8. What I didn't say to you is that a reference to the Lord, who maker of heaven and earth, the Lord, occurs 10 times in these 8 verses. Why? Because the psalmist wants you to get that he is the active agent. He is the subject working on your behalf. 10 times he is referenced. And notice this salvation, but when I say salvation, I mean his deliverance, his physical deliverance, his help, his rescue, his protection is extensive. It is boundless. It is immeasurable. It is large scale. It is sweeping. How can you be so sure? Well, look at verse 7. The Lord will protect you Notice from all evil. See how pervasive that is, how boundless that is. And this word for evil here in our verse 7 is the same word for evil in Psalm 23 when you learn that even though I were to walk through a valley of deep darkness, notice again, unknown, threat from thieves and robbers as a sheep as you travel through these dark valleys, a valley of deep darkness, or as some translations as the shadow of death, because death was nearby, potentially life-threatening. Even though I were to walk through a valley of deep darkness, this is unknown peril. But like the psalmist in Psalm 121, he has a known protector. He says, I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. And the word for evil in Psalm 23 and verse 4, as well as here, is the word for harm, for injury, for calamity, for whatever brings pain or distress, including the pain of sin and the consequences of sin. Sin is the word for misfortune of any shape and size and form. Now, something that you may not have noticed as well in this psalm is, I told you 2 weeks ago or so now that Psalms 1 and 2 are bracketed with the word blessed. How blessed is the man. Psalm 1:1, and then how blessed all who take refuge in him. Psalm 2:12. That's a very intentional literary device that poets use, like the psalmists. And here's one of those devices here too. It's called inclusio or inclusion. Maybe you didn't notice that in verse 1, remember, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from whence shall my help come? And then in verse 8, the Lord will guard your going out and your coming in. It starts with the word come, it ends with the word coming. It's the same word. And the psalmist places it at the beginning and the end, partly to show you that God is able to protect you in all circumstances. That's what this is meant to convey. But the idea is that if help comes from the Lord for the worshiper will safely come home. He will return home. Now think again, beloved, the context here is corporate worship. And so when the psalmist says the Lord will guard your going out, it means you're going out to Jerusalem, you're going out to worship the Lord, you're going out to corporate service, and you're coming in back home. Now, is this a guarantee that you will always be physically safe in worship? No. God's plan for you does come to an end at some point on earth. No, you can contract COVID when we meet. In the early 1990s, as a young Christian, I attended St. James Church in Kenilworth, Cape Town, and you'll recall the massacre of July 1993 when armed gunmen came and mowed down several congregants. Just last week, Sunday, you would have read of a church in Pretoria where two robbers came in to rob congregants. No, it's not a guarantee that you will always be physically safe, but it is a guarantee that you will forever be spiritually safe in worship. How can you be so sure? Well, look at verse 8. The Lord will guard you going out and you're coming in from this time forth. And here's two key words: and forevermore. Your worship forevermore. Not only that, but look for a moment at verse 7. At the end of verse 7, He will keep your soul. Your soul. So, as you think about this inclusio, this psalm that is bracketed by come in verse 1 and coming, same word in verse 8, the idea is that if help comes from the Lord, the worshipper will safely come home. Not only his literal home here on earth when he returns from the corporate worship service, but he will reach his final destination, his home in heaven, his heavenly home, Mount Zion in the sense of heaven, the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and the new earth. Put another way, you can confidently trust the Lord to protect you in your spiritual journey. Your spiritual journey. As you move forward toward God in worship, in obedience, in service, you can expect God's powerful and abiding protection. Listen to Matthew 28 and verse 20, which really parallels this psalm. The Lord Jesus says, "Lo, this is indeed of Psalm 121. Psalm 121. Indeed, behold, truly, verily, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Now think about that. The context of this verse is a context of corporate ministry of the church, of service of the church, corporate service of the church. And at least one of the applications is a corporate church worship service when people are taught and are baptized. One, there are many, but one application for you and I is to gather corporately as Grace Christian Church. I close with a quote from Tom Buck. This is a Twitter feed or thread or whatever you call it. Tom Buck is a pastor from Texas, and he challenges us with a very thought-provoking idea. Listen to what Tom Buck wrote a few days ago. Quote, "For decades, evangelicals have declared to our students that they should risk their lives and families' lives to go to a foreign country to plant churches. Now, many of the same are telling them that you shouldn't even risk going to your own church until you know it's 100% safe." Beloved, here on this earth and in this nation and in this city, you will never be 100% safe. There are risks all around you all the time. There are threats, there are imminent dangers all the time. But you and I can confidently say with the hymn writer, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. And some of you can testify more about that than others because you have walked with the Lord for longer. "'Tis grace hath brought me." Notice, grace. Not a president, not a vaccine, not your health, not your bank account, not where you live and which country you live in. 'Tis grace. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far. The maker of heaven and earth hath brought me safe thus far. And it's his grace and his grace alone that'll lead me home. Let's pray. Lord, you provided protection for your people through the ages, like the psalmist who represents your people and the fellow worshippers with him in the psalm. And we ask that you would protect us in a similar way, so that, like them, we can testify of your grace and your protection. Amen.